chapter 23. Okay, so the parasites of medical importance. Okay, for our microbiome class. Once again, follow along with your little study guide if you would like to. I also had a student in my freshman classes complain about a 30-minute video. I said, well, you should see my microbiome videos. But like I told him, I'm putting these on YouTube for you guys, so I mean, it's not gonna hurt my feelings if you increase the speed, but that's up to you. Okay, but that little tidbit out of the way, let's continue. Okay, and so basically, general kind of intro to things. Parasitology. What is it? Well, it's a study of eukaryotic parasites. Okay, and these can include the protozoans and our helminths or our worms, right? And so protozoans are just unicellular um animal-like organisms, basically animal-like in that, they do all these functions, you know, with very few how should I say, with more advanced organelle systems that are that of like animal cells, okay? And then we have our worms, right? And worms is just a general term. So is helminth. Helminth is just a general term for a worm. But 20% of all infectious diseases are caused by these two guys, okay? And so they're less prevalent in more industrialized countries. However, they're more common in patients that are immunocompromised, such as AIDS and HIV patients. Okay. And uh, protozoans, right? They're single-celled animal-like microbes. They have some form of motility, usually. Okay. And there's an estimated 100,000 species, and of those, around 25 are important because they are pathogens. Okay. And so we have these different types of life cycles from these different protozoans, and they can vary. However, most propagate by simple asexual cell division from their active feeding cell. Okay, and so we call this a troph, right? Troph for short is what I'm having y'all know, but trophozoite, full word. Okay. And then they can undergo this this formation of a cyst. Okay, they can become a cyst, and so others have more complex life cycles. These can include asexual and sexual phases. Okay, and we're going to be looking at these different protozoans that are pathogens, right? And so here's just kind of like a little overview. We're going to be looking at Entamoeba histolytica, Naegleria fowleri, Acanthamoeba, Balantidium coli, Trichomonas, Giardia, and Trypanosoma. Okay, that was Trypanosoma brucei. We'll also be looking at Cruzi, and then Leishmania. Okay, and then also Plasmodiums. Okay. So we have these different kind of organizations for our protozoans, and so we've got the amoeboid type, right? We've got our ciliated types, and then our flagellated types, and all of these will occur in different kind of scenarios. Okay, and then we've got our apicomplexans, kind of like what we had gone over in lab, guys. But basically, they're gonna be causing different types of infections. Okay, and so this is just showing you a table of the different drugs they use. I'm not gonna have you memorize for the exam the types of drugs they use, but for those of you who are pre-med, these are kind of nice to note what you would use to treat these different types of pathogens. Chloroquine is really always related with malaria type infections, right? And so just kind of different things to think about here. Okay, and different protozoans have different types of medications that can target them specifically, okay? And this kind of explains the mechanism by which they can target these particular species. But let's get to more of the beef of the meal, okay? Let's get into what I'm trying to get y'all to know. So, we have this trophin assist form, right? One is the feeding form, and then one is the non-motile cyst, okay? And so when we look at the species Entamoeba histolytica, it causes amoebiasis, okay? Which is, an amoeba, an amoebic infection, okay? And so it can alternate between these two different forms, okay? And the trophozoites are typically larger. The cysts are typically smaller, okay? And that's because the trophozoite has a very large nucleus. But aside from that, it doesn't have too much of any other organelles. A cyst, right? Uh, it'll be encased in a tough wall around it. And these for Entamoeba histolytica, you can notice that it'll have 4 nuclei, and then bodies, right? The 4 nuclei and bodies, and we call these chromatoidals, okay? And so what those are, they're just dense clusters of ribosomes, and that's how you can kind of when you're looking at them visually, that's how you can identify these guys, okay? And so how do they enter the body? Well, we'll ingest them somehow, right? We're getting this Entamoeba histolytica into our body, like through eating or drinking. And when we do that, right, we're eating the cyst form, okay? So the cyst is kind of almost like a dormant state of this protozoan, right? But once it's ingested, our body is the ideal habitat for this, okay? So once they passed through the stomach, they'll become trophozoites, okay? And so they'll be released all throughout the small intestine, and they can encyst into the large intestine. Eventually, their cysts are released through fecal matter, and that's how they're put back out into the environment, okay? And this is just showing you, the trophozoite, what it looks like, It's got this large kind of odd, not uniform shape of a body. It becomes a cyst. It's this very small kind of uniform type of cell. And then when encystment happens, it's just forming more of these that will eventually, right, these little nuclei will go in and form these different cells that eventually become the trophozoite, okay? Humans are the primary host for amoebiasis by histolytica, right? And so they're swallowed, and so like I said, they go through the small intestine, and so when it goes through that, our alkaline pH and our digestive fluids will help to stimulate these cysts to release into 4 trophozoites, and then those trophozoites will then attach and multiply, and they'll basically move throughout the body and feed on us, okay? And that's how that goes. And so, 90% of patients, they'll be asymptomatic, not even realize they have this amoeba inside of them. However, the amoeba can sometimes secrete enzymes that'll dissolve tissues, allowing it to go into deeper layers of the mucosa, okay? And when that happens, it can cause dysentery, abdominal pain, fever, diarrhea, and weight loss from expelling all of this waste, okay? And it's carried actually by 10% of the population. And so you can see this is from a cadaver, and so we have that erosion of that intestine, and that's just from the toxins they've secreted to try and get deeper. And so we can have some different life-threatening visible manifestations such as hemorrhages, right? You can also have perforation. You can even get appendicitis. You could get tumor-like growths and amoeba masses, okay? Um, and they can become systemic and invade the liver and the lung. And so, in more severe forms, you can have a 10% fatality rate. Initial diagnosis would be by looking through the microscope. And how you would do that is you would get a fecal sample and put that on the scope, a smear of it, and you would look and see if there are trophozoites or cysts present in that fecal sample. And so, treatment, you'd be using these drugs. You'd be using metronidazole, right? Tinidazole, paramomycin, or nitazoxanide. So, little handful to say, but this is how you treat entamoeba histolytica. Okay. And once again, this is what it's looking like. So this is a troph form, and we see all these, but those are actually just little ingested blood cells that they have. Okay, they only have one large nuclei, which you can see right there. And then right here we have, you can see very vaguely the 4 different nuclei bodies. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And with that, let's move on to amoebic infections in the brain. Okay, and so we have 2 different organisms that can cause this. And so we have one, Naegleria fowleri, and then we have acanthamoeba. Okay, and these 2 organisms will usually inhabit standing water. So usually water that's been, kind of warm. There hasn't been any stirring of the water, so there's not a lot of flow going on, and it's just been kind of sitting there. And so you can have this occur, right, when this organism enters through the nasal cavity, right, from water or even traumatic eye damage. But when it enters, right, and it causes an infection, we call this PAM, or primary acute meningoencephalitis. Okay, and so what is that? Well, basically, this this infection will destroy brain tissue. And when that happens, it causes a lot of swelling. And when that swelling happens of the brain, it usually results in death. Okay. And yeah, just as we said, infiltration of the brain is usually fatal. And so these are just some different images of that. Here we have the Naegleria and then the acanthamoeba. Okay. Going back onto that, your textbook had, which I'm not requiring you to read these clinical cases, but it did mention something that's kind of been almost like a little fear of mine, but neti pots. A lot of people use neti pots to kind of help clean out nasal cavities, or maybe they need that extra, they need the extra moisture in their nose. It's too dry. But if you need to use a neti pot, or you have some kind of uh, religious ritual practice where you have to get water into the nose, only ever use boiled sterilized water or distilled water. Okay? Do not be using tap water. And that's because, right, there has been instances, as your textbook message, where basically Naegleria fowleri had been found in the tap water of these people's homes who had just been putting tap water into their neti pot and then got this horrible infection. Okay, so if you do put water up your nose, right, don't be doing it after you swam in some questionable water, and don't be doing it with just tap water. Okay, make sure that's distilled before you put that into your nasal cavity. Okay. And according to the CDC, I got this number, but out of the 154 people that have been known to be infected with Naegleria fowleri in the U.S., um, from all the way from 1962 to 2021, only 4 people have survived this the this primary amoebic meningoencephalitis. Okay, so be very careful, guys. Hold your nose when you're going into some weird water. Okay. And so now we're going to move on to some ciliates. We're done with the amoebas, but we're going to go ahead and go into intestinal ciliate, and this is Balantidium coli. Okay. And so this basically occupies the intestines of different domestic animals, especially in livestock such as pigs and cattle. And so you can acquire it by ingesting the cyst from contaminated food or water. Okay. And so basically, right, once it becomes a trophozoite and it's in the intestine, it'll erode it, and you can get these kinds of intestinal symptoms, but rarely it penetrates through the intestine. It's just going to be eroding it. So this is what it looks like in your textbook, right? We've got our trophozoite, right? So that's the motile form, right? You've got all these little cilia, you got the cilia tufts, and you've got this macronucleus here. But for them, they also have a micronucleus. And so when you're looking under the scope, you're going to see these 2 little bodies. And you're going to see right here, this opening, we call this a cystosome, a cytosome, with the tufts, right? But, you know, with a cyst, you're going to be seeing a little bit less of that. You're only going to have that macronucleus and some vacuoles and a thick cyst wall. And so basically these grow under anaerobic conditions, right? No O2. And so they're going to be in the presence of the host's bacterial microbiota, right? They're getting comfortable within your body with these other microbiota in you. And so healthy humans, fine and resistant. But if it does get in you and you've got a weakened immune system, you know, you're gonna have to really be careful and get this treated. And these are just different medications that you would take to treat this. And so you'd have tetracycline, idaquinol, nitramazine, or metronidazole. Okay. Once again, I'm not making y'all memorize these. And so, doing a concept check, going back from Entamoeba histolytica. Oh, where does this invade, guys? Small intestine. Hope you got it right. Give yourself a pat on the back if you did. Okay. Moving on. So we're going into the different types of Trichomonas species. Okay. And so these little species, they're very small, kind of pear-shaped, still protozoans, okay? And Trichomonas species can be identified very easily because they have these 4 flagella that are present on them. And they also have this undulating membrane that is on the outer side of their body that kind of helps them flow throughout us, okay? They only have a troph form. There is no cyst form in Trichomonas, okay? Please remember that, okay? Trichomonas only has a troph form. And so the ones we're going to look at today are the 3 that infect humans. And so we've got Trichomonas vaginalis, Trichomonas tenax, and then Trichomonas hominis, okay? And once again, we're just kind of looking at this little undulating membrane. I'm sure you can see those through your slide examples. And then here are the 4 different flagella at the bottom. Yeah, so I was pointing to that and this. And yeah, kind of pear-shaped. Here we go with some more. So with Trichomonas vaginalis, this one causes an STD, and it's called a trichomoniasis. Okay. Its reservoir is actually in the human urogenital tract, and so 50% of people who are infected with this are asymptomatic, and so that's pretty interesting. You could have this and not even know. But it's a strict parasite. So, like I said, its reservoir, right, where a lot of these live, is in the urogenital tract. Well, if it's not in that area, it cannot survive outside of the host. Okay. Uh, we have 3 million cases per year. It's a very prevalent STD. And so in females, the symptoms that will occur will be a foul-smelling odor from the vaginal area, and you will get this kind of green to yellow discharge that is excreted. You can also have vulvitis, which is just basically an irritation of the vulva. They're going to be visibly irritated. And then we have cervicitis, so the cervix can get infected. And you can see this through a pap smear. And then we can have, this you gotta keep going to the restroom. You're frequently going and going, and you've got pain. And so, this is, if you're getting these symptoms, it's basically should go see your doctor, because you could have this STD. And so for male symptoms, they'll have urethritis, right? They've got inflammation of that urethra. And then they'll have this odd kind of thin milky discharge coming out from the penis. And occasionally they can get a prostate infection. And so it's really affecting the genitalia. Okay. And treatment? Well, you can take oral medications for this, or you can use a vaginal application of metronidazole. Okay. And continue on with this, right? We're going to talk about Giardia intestinalis. And so this causes giardiasis, okay? And once again, it's a flagellate, right? It's a pathogenic flagellate, one that causes a disease. And with Giardia, they're kind of unique and easy to identify because of their unique structure. And they kind of look like a little heart that have concave ventral surfaces. And like I had shown y'all in lab, if we look at them sideways, it's almost like they have a little suction cup where they can attach to their host. And so cysts are very small. They're compact and multinucleate. So you can tell this is a Giardia a cyst if it has multinucleate. Okay. And reservoirs, where do we get a lot of this from? Well, beavers, cattle, coyotes, cats, and humans. So beavers, if you're, I had told you about my friend in Yellowstone. He was only using a little filtration straw, but he was drinking water from the river, and then he got Giardia intestinalis. Okay, um, because he had drinking some contaminated water from some kind of animal's feces, right, where the cysts would be present. And so the cyst can survive for 2 months in the environment. Okay, and then this is that weird little heart shape we were kind of talking about. Okay, and you can see the two little nucleus in lab. Some of y'all were saying, oh, they look like little eyes. Well, yeah, those are their two little nucleus. Okay, their little nuclei. And then this is just it. Right here, we can see this kind of depression right here on the ventral side of them, which allows for that kind of suction cup-like action. And then the cyst over here, we see these multiple nuclei here at the bottom. Okay. And like I had said in my example, right, you're gonna ingest these through contaminated water and food. And you can ID this by seeing a bunch of cysts that they can enter the duodenum, and then they can germinate, and then they can travel to the G-genome, right, to feed and multiply. And so, like we said, it causes giardiasis, and symptoms of this are just really bad diarrhea and abdominal pain. Um, no matter how much you drink, you're gonna be very dehydrated because this diarrhea is just completely dehydrating you. And so, diagnosis can be really difficult, just because this organism is getting shed through feces. What my friend had to do was give a fecal sample to his doctor once he got back into town. Um, and so that's how they were able to identify it. Um, but yeah, treatment, you're going to be using quinacrine or metronidazole, right? And so how do you avoid this in nature? Well, you got to boil your water, okay? If you're on somewhere like Naked and Afraid or some kind of camping trip, you need to boil that water. You can also add ozone, or you could also add iodine. I was in a very rural part of Mexico, and me and my colleagues had stopped and gotten water from a grocery store, because we knew that they came from the Coca-Cola company, and so it was fine water to drink. But the geologists who accompanied us on that trip, they just assumed that um, you know that, or well, not assumed, but they were fine, because what they had done was they had gotten the tap water from the little place we were staying at, and they were mixing it with iodine. They were fine. Nobody got giardia, so all was good. They were just drinking yellow water. We weren't. This is what you'd see under the scope. They have added different fluorescences to them so that they're easier to see when they are mixed in with different material. And with that, let's move on because we've got a lot to go through, guys. So we're going to talk about hemoflagellates, right? These are still flagellates, flagellated protozoans, but these guys exist strictly in the blood, okay? So that's why we say we have vector-borne blood parasites, meaning that they need a vector to get into our systems, okay? And these parasites can really only survive in the blood of living humans and in the tissue of living humans, okay? So obligate, they need to. They can cause really, really bad, life-threatening and debilitating zoonoses, or um, uh, illnesses caused by living organisms, right? These are spread in different types of tropical regions, usually by blood-sucking insects, and we'll get to that into more detail. And those, right, they serve as an intermediate host, but those insects will pass them on to their primary or their main host, and so we call those insects vectors, okay? And a lot of these hemoflagellates have really complicated life cycles. If this was a parasitology class, I would have you memorize all of these life cycles. But don't worry, for your exam, I'm not having you memorize these life cycles. I want you to know more about the medical sense on how, on what they are, what they cause, and how you get them, okay? Uh, and your textbook lists into detail the different types of cycles that there are. Okay, but we're gonna zoom through this. And so these can be categorized according to their different cellular stages that are infective. Okay, and so from this group we have these different representatives such as Trypanosoma and Leishmania species. Okay. And these are nice terms to use when talking about different uh, hemoflagellate parasites, okay? So we have the amastigote phase, okay? And so this is when it's in a form that lacks a flagellum, okay? Then we have promastigote, okay? This is the stage that has a single flagellum at the end of its body, at the anterior flagellum. Then we have an epimastigote, and so this is just the flagellate stage, right? It's all flagella-y, okay? And then we have the trypomastigote, okay? And it's large. It's at its fully formed stage. It's at its Chad stage if you like memes. But the trypomastigote, okay. And so these are just different examples of these. And so with the Leishmania species, right? These are intracellular, okay, and they can get into our macrophages. Where are they found? Well, this permastigote, in their permastigote stage, right, which we know as the single flagellum, right, they're going to be in the sandfly gut, okay, and then that's where they're infective to humans, right? That's where they can get transferred, okay. Um, the Leishmania species, they don't really have these stages right here. For the Trypanosoma brucei, it doesn't have an amastigote stage or a promastigote stage, but it does have its epimastigote stage where it's covered in flagella, and that will be in the salivary glands of the tsetse fly. Okay. And we'll also find it in the biting mouth parts of the tsetse flies when it becomes this trypomastigote phase. And so when it's in its trypomastigote form, that's when it is infective to humans. Like I said, if this was just a parasitology course, I would have y'all memorize which stage is the stage they become infective to humans. But this is a microbiome course, okay? So we're just wanting to know what these are and what they cause. So don't feel overwhelmed that you have to memorize that, okay? But it's good to look at. And so crucii, right? This is where it will be in the human macrophages, right, of our liver, our hearts, and our spleens. Not good. And so yes, it does have a promastigote stage, but the epimastigote is alive in a true bug in the family Reduvidae, and it's we call this bug the kissing bug, okay? And so this occurs in the feces of reduvid bugs, and so that's when it can get transferred into humans. Okay, and these are just examples of that, So then we have our species that I want us to look at. And so we've got the Trypanosoma, right? And so the species within the genus Trypanosoma, they're usually distinguished by their infective stage, right? Which is the trypomastigote. We've got the trip, and so this form, it's elongate, kind of spindle shaped, and it has tapered ends. And I think it's cute that they say it's eel-like in its movement. It is. It's kind of swimming through and around. And so we have two different types that I want us to take a look at. And so we've got Trypanosoma brucei, which causes African sleeping sickness. And then we have Trypanosoma cruzi, and this causes Chagas disease. And so this is endemic to Central and South America. However, with global warming occurring, we're having this move up. And so for those of you who like camping out west in like Big Bend and stuff, it may be hot and you may be tempted to just sleep on a cot outside, but please at least have some kind of bug net to encase yourself in, like a mosquito net of sorts, because you don't want to be bit by this kissing bug and get it, okay? So let's go on. And so Trypanosoma brucei, this one is spread by the tsetse fly, okay? And we have two variants of this disease, and I'm not going to go into the different subspecies with y'all because once again this is a microbiome course. But based on these different geographic ranges, we have these two different subspecies, okay, of Gambiense and then Rhodesiense, okay, and that's in West Africa and East Africa. But basically, what occurs, right, is for this particular species is that we have the biting from this tsetse fly. It'll inoculate the skin with the trypanomastogote phase, and once it's entering our skin, it multiplies and proliferates in our blood. And what this will damage is the spleen, the lymph nodes, and the brain. It is a hell of a parasite, and it's one that we really want to avoid, but it's very prevalent in these areas. And so here's just kind of showing how it gets in, and y'all should remember these from lab, seeing these different kinds of blood smears, right? And so once again, it's carried in the saliva of this tsetse fly. And so that's how it passes. It'll bite the human tissue. And so, once again, this entire species occurs throughout Africa, but these subspecies occur here. Okay? But I just want you to know Trypanosoma brucei, okay? And this just explains what I just said. Okay? It can be harbored out through mammals. And so here are some of the different chronic symptoms we'll see from this disease. And so we'll have sleep disturbances. You'll get tremors in your sleep, and you can even get paralysis. And worst case, you could even go into a coma. Okay. And diagnose it. Well, you can do this by getting a sample of blood, spinal fluid, or fluid from the lymph nodes, and do a microscope slide of that and look for it there. How do you treat it? So you can treat it before it gets into, if you catch it early enough, into the neurological or the central nervous system, right? You can use melarsoprol, eflornithine, okay? Um, uh, but once it reaches that neurological area, the CNS, it's kind of game over, guys. But control, uh, just taking care of the amount of tsetse flies, like trying to, get rid of them and prevent them from, proliferating and being able to spread. And so, if you're looking for a job, genetic entomologists have a lot of range, and so if you can produce genetically sterile flies, maybe you can help. I don't know. Someone do a thesis on that, okay? All right, make good money. For the other species of Trypanosoma, which is Trypanosoma crucei, right? It causes Chagas disease, okay? And it comes from this true bug in the family Reduvidae, okay? But we call it the kissing bug, okay? And that's just because I really like entomology. I love invertebrate zoology, so I've got too many facts for this. But so basically, right, these particular true bugs are kind of like mosquitoes in that they're attracted to the release of CO2 because they realize that that's like there's something living there. There's something warm with blood, and so they're attracted to the release of CO2. So typically, a person who has been bit by a kissing bug will kind of know because you get this bite mark, and so these are true bugs. So true bugs arrived before the beetles, so they don't have mandibles yet. They've only got a straw. So you'll have this one little piercing, sucking mouth part, right? And it'll cause a deep little bite, or I guess a puncture wound around your mouth. So that's why it's called the kissing bug. You'll see it around your mouth, and it gets it kind of puffy and agitated, and it looks kind of bad. And so, like I said, it occurs in Central and South America, but now we're kind of seeing it a little more in Mexico and in different southern parts of the U.S. So think of the Southwest, like Big Bend area is where you could get it in Texas. So please use a net when you are camping, um, if it's too hot to set up a tent. But yeah, infection occurs, however, when the bug feces, right, are inoculated into a cutaneous portal. So usually when these bugs are biting on you, they're also, for lack of a better term, shitting on you as well. And so, this excrement can get into the wound that they cause on you, and so you can tell because you're gonna have more of a reaction when they are um, releasing and relieving themselves on you, and so you can get a little lesion in that area, and then you can get you can come down with a fever. Your lymph nodes will swell. Um, you know, your spleen can get an infection, and a lot throughout the liver. And crazy part of Chagas is that you can get bit by this bug. Um, I wonder if in this slide did I include what this bug looks like? No, I didn't. Oh. Okay, but basically, right? So it's getting it's feeding on these different animals, right? And you've got the different stages of this guy, but once it reaches this phase right here is when it gets into the humans, right? That's when it's ready. And so this is our reduvid bug. I wish they would actually put scientific name because um, that is something better to know than just reduvid. It's let's see, it's caused by different Triatoma species, and so you know what? I think I would like y'all to actually see this image because if y'all see this bug, y'all should be careful. Let's look up Triatoma. Okay. And so typically what you'll see is this striping pattern of the orange. Okay. And this is a dorsal view, so you can't see their piercing, sucking mouth part on the side. But if we were to see them a little sideways, if we have any, they do have basically a straw-like structure. And yeah. Oh, that's a little nymph. Little baby. Anyways, just thought y'all should see characteristic of these. If y'all see these around, definitely kill them. Yeah, here we go. Piercing, sucking mouth part right there. And definitely, if you see these and you wake up with little kissing marks from this guy, go to a doctor. Get this checked out. You gotta wait a little bit though, cause you gotta wait for these guys to kind of show up in your bloodstream. So basically, right, it's gonna be causing problems in your heart. So you'll also be getting problems in your large intestines, where they're gonna be having these masses of the amastigote phase of this protozoan. And so what happens when you get an infestation of these is you can get chronic inflammation occurring in your organs, particularly your heart and your brain. And the way you would treat this is with these parasitic medications, which is nifurtimox and benzodiazole. Okay, but this one, it takes a while for it to proliferate. So a lot of people won't even know they have this at all, and then one day they'll just die due to heart failure. So kind of odd, this one. It takes a while. But here we can see he's got the little kissing bite mark right there. And here it is, right, within the heart. We've got all of the little amastigote phases within there, just kind of pervading the entire muscle tissue. Okay, enough with Trypanosoma cruzi. I really like that one. Um, it's just neat. But well, I don't like it. You know, you can't really like a disease-causing pathogen, guys. They're just neat. Okay, Marge Simpson. I think they're neat. Okay, so we're getting into Leishmania, and so these cause leishmaniasis. Um, and so it's a zoonotic disease, right? A zoonosis, transmitted uh, through different mammalian hosts, particularly through the female sandfly. And what they require is a blood meal, so that way they can have enough energy to produce these eggs. And we only find these on equatorial regions, so only on regions along the equator. And so what do we see? Well, this occurs when the promastigote stage of this protozoan gets injected into a mammal through the sandfly. And then eventually they go into their amastigote phase and they just completely proliferate. They're reproducing like crazy. And so if the macrophage uh, doesn't migrate to where this infection is occurring, um, basically, uh, oh, I'm sorry, is, if this macrophage, right, if it's not migrating anywhere else throughout the body, right, we're gonna call this a localized infection, okay? And so it can become systemic if we get a macrophage going out into the bloodstream. So kind of like how we had talked about in some of the fungi, where they can completely invade a macrophage and create all of these little guys, right? These organisms. And so as long as he just stays in the area, you're fine. But if these go throughout the bloodstream and get carried throughout different systems of the body, it can become systemic. Okay. What does this cause? Well, you get these basically cutaneous sores, right? You can also get what they call a Baghdad boil, and it's just an ulcerated sore. It's really uncomfortable. You can also get Espundia, which is basically a skin and mucous membrane infection through the head, and so it can become chronic. Okay, and um, like we had said previously, it can become systemic, and when it is systemic, you can get these high fevers, you can get weight loss, your spleen can get enlarged. Interesting fact, when you're dissecting animals, um, uh, I've seen this a lot in different like mice and stuff, and you see that their spleen is incredibly enlarged. They're either pregnant or fighting off some kind of weird parasite. So yeah, when you're doing that, your spleen gets kind of huge, and then you get your lymph nodes becoming enlarged as well. Um, and so we can have Kala Azar, and this is basically the most severe and fatal form of leishmaniasis if you leave it untreated. Okay. Oh, sorry guys, I didn't put any little cats in this one to get you prepared for this, but yeah, here we go. Uh, that's what you'll typically see of the lesions from this species. Real quick, we'll just do a little concept check, but hemoflagellates. How are they transmitted by? They've got to enter the bloodstream. Hemo, blood, flagellate, right? They gotta swim. Okay. See if you get it right. Insect vectors. Some are transmitted by bug feces, but not all. So it's just insect vectors, right? We've got the sand flies. We've got our reduvids, our different guys, you know? let's go ahead and talk about the apicomplexans. Okay, we're done with the flagellates. Let's move on to the apicomplexans. Okay, and so we have some that we can call sporozoans, and these ones, they basically lack any form of locomotor kind of structures or organelles when they are in their troph state. And so their apicomplexans are just an odd little group. How do they get around if their troph state, doesn't have any kind of locomotor um, appendages, right, or morphology? Well, we'll find out. So they alternate between sexual and asexual phases, and also between different animal hosts. And so they 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 can form specialized kind of bodies to infect people, right? That are transmitted by vectors. And so we have the arthropods, right, which include insects, and then we can have them infect us through food or water or other means. Arthropod is just anything with a chitinous exoskeleton. So we can also have other things besides insects like arachnids. We got ticks and different things like that, and mites. But typical representatives for apicomplexans would be plasmodiums, and then we've got toxoplasma and cryptosporidium. Okay. And so getting into plasmodium, this is the cause of malaria, this particular genus of different species. Okay. So we've got 5 species. We've got Plasmodium malariae, Plasmodium vivax, Plasmodium falciparum. Look at that. Why did they capitalize that? That should be under lowercase. And then we've got Plasmodium ovale, and then Plasmodium knowlesi. Okay. And so these are transmitted by the species Anopheles. Okay. These are particular mosquitoes, not in the species Culex where you think of everyday mosquitoes. No, this is particular of Anopheles, which occurs in these more tropical type of regions and hotter regions. Okay, we don't see those up here. And so there are 300 to 500 million new cases each year, and we actually have 2 million deaths per year. That's a lot of people, guys. So when it's in its asexual phase, that's when it's in the humans. And so you're only ever bitten by female mosquitoes, okay? So you get infected by a female mosquito, and she'll basically inject these what we call sporozoites, and those will eventually travel to the liver, and then basically they'll have what we call schizogony, which is just a fancy word for asexual division. Okay, so the sporites go to the liver and they're dividing like crazy, and then those eventually generate a myrizoite, and the myrizoite is what enters the blood circulation, and this all happens within 2 weeks, depending on the particular species there, of the Plasmodium, not the not Anopheles. Okay, but myrizoites will basically attach to your red blood cells and enter them, and then that's when they go back into this troph form, and it'll multiply like crazy. But once again, this troph form does not have flagella or any kind of structure to kind of get them around. They're just getting through by bursting out of those red blood cells. Okay, and they release them throughout. And so once that happens, they can differentiate into different gametes, right? And so, asexual phase is what enters the human, right? But once they're in us, they can form different gametes, okay? And so sexual phase, let's talk about the mosquito, okay? The mosquito draws basically infected red blood cells from the host, right? And so those gametes that were made in us and that were, spread throughout our bloodstream, right? The mosquito is gonna slurp that up, and those different gametes that it ingested, they're going to fertilize each other, and then they'll form a single diploid cell, right? And then we get those sporozoites in the mosquito's stomach, okay? And then those will basically set themselves into the salivary glands of the mosquito, so that way, when the mosquito goes into its next human blood meal, that's when they can be transferred. And so this is just kind of showing you what you're gonna see, right? When you're looking at these different plasmodium under the scope, right? When they're in our blood, what we will see is this ring in our blood cells, right? The blood cells are not, a lot of y'all had me look under your scopes and we're like, is that the organism? Well, no, that's the blood cell, but within it we have the ring form of this trophozoite, okay? But it's entering blood through there. We have the release of the meteorozoites, and then when it decides to take another meal from us, it's gonna suck those up, okay? And yeah, that's just basically explaining what we had seen. And so, what are some symptoms? We get chills, fever, sweating. People who get this become anemic, right? I mean, their blood cells are exploding, so, I mean, of course they're going to be anemic, right? And then we've got organ enlargement, okay? And so symptoms can occur as early as 48 to 72 hours between these red blood cells rupturing. And so it depends on the particular Plasmodium species, the time frame, but basically you'll notice it once the blood cells are rupturing, okay? And so with Plasmodium falciparum, which is the most harmful type, the most malignant type, right? We have the highest death rate in children because they're so small. Their immune systems aren't developed yet, right? They can't handle this. And so how do we diagnose this? We look at blood smears and we look for the trophozoite. Okay? And we look for symptoms. Unfortunately, these guys are becoming more resistant to drugs. And so you have to go through this therapy over a long time using chloroquine or mefloquine. And that's how you treat it. Back in the old days, they just give you chloroquine and hope you survive that. But we have these more drugs that are available to not hurt us as badly when we take them. But these protozoans are becoming more and more resistant to these different drugs, so you're having to do this longer exposure to them. And so basically, as we had said, you diagnose them. You can see them in the blood smear, and then also what kind of symptoms are present in the patient. And treatment is just based on the quinine drugs. And so chloroquine, when the drug resistance isn't a problem, you can use Malarone is the actual specific name of like the drug. But when we have artemisinin based, this will be a combination therapy, and so we call this like ACT, right? And those are the different ways you can treat it. Another way is through controlling the mosquito population. Okay, and so you can help to decline the mosquito population by genetically producing these sterile males. They're no longer able to mate with females and produce more viable offspring, and so you get a decline in their population. It works, it just takes a little bit. Then we have human prophylaxis, and so you can also get vaccinated for this. But it's very, very difficult to develop with current technology. But the most advanced vaccine that they have out right now, which we call RTS, targets, falciparum, the most malignant form of this. And it's basically just there to help prevent liver infection. And also please just using those bug nets to kind of prevent even getting bit by these different by that mosquito species, so you don't get different plasmodium infections. And so with that, let's move into the helminths, okay? The worms, right? And so these are actually animals. They are multicellular, right? So they have specialized tissues, they have organs. And so adults of these parasites are large and noticeable. And so we have, different types. And so adult worms can mate and produce fertilized eggs, and the eggs can hatch. And so we have these different stages to get into the mature adult. And so with the worms, as we had discussed in labs, we can have either separate sexes or they can contain both sexes in which they're hermaphroditic, right? And so in adulthood, that's when they're mature, and so they're able to mate. And they can basically mate in the host, right? Which is a definitive host, okay? And then the larval development can occur between the intermediate host, okay? But then transport host, it doesn't have any kind of development going on. But basically they have 4 different types of life cycles and transmissions. And so we have what we looked in kind of at lab, which we have nematodes, right? Which are the roundworms in the phylum Nematoda, right? And so we've got intestinal nematodes, and so those can basically infect different parts of the body from humans, or in humans, right? And so we've got the species Trichuris trichuria, which causes whipworm. We have Ascaris lumbricoides that causes ascariasis. Got Enterobus vermicularis, and this is the pinworm, right? And so we've got Nicator americanus, which is the New World hookworm, and then we've got Ankylostoma duodenale, and that's the Old World hookworm. And so hookworms aren't specific to just humans in general, but they do require a human life cycle. And so we've also got threadworms. We've got the trichina worms, right? Which are little circular kind of guys. Then we've got different nematodes that can occur within the tissue. And they can cause filariasis, right? Or river blindness or eye worms. Then we've got our trematodes, which are basically our flukes, and those can occur in the blood or in the liver. In sheep. And so we've got all these different kinds, and we're going to look at some of those, okay? Then we've also got the cestodes, which would be our tapeworms, okay? And so we have Artania species, which can occur in beef and pork. We even have some that occur in fish. And then we have our dwarf tapeworm. And so these helminths exhibit 4 different types of life cycles. And so we have cycle A, where the worm develops in our intestine. Then the egg is released through the feces into the outside environment, right? And the eggs will then be ingested by a new host and then hatch in that new host's intestine. Okay. In cycle B, we have where the worms have come to maturity in the intestine, and then eggs are eventually released through feces, and then the larvae will then hatch and develop in the outside environment. Okay. But with humans, the infection will occur by getting through the skin. Okay, and so that the hookworms are through the skin. Okay. In cycle C, we have adult matures, right? And those are in the intestine. Okay. But the eggs are then once again released into the environment through the excrement, and then the eggs are eaten by grazing animals. Oh no, right? And once it's in the animal, it's in an intermediate phase. It's not doing anything to the host. But the larval forms will actually insist into the tissue of the meat of that host, and then the humans will eat it again. And so we get this infection. This is typical in a lot of those Tania species, the ones with the scolex, remember. And so our fourth cycle, which is cycle D, eggs are released from the humans, right? And then the humans basically are infected by ingesting the 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 larval phase, or by direct penetration, like so it can actually enter us through our feet. And so we have these different organisms, Episthlurcus and then Schistosoma. Okay. So this is just a little table kind of showing what kind of things will happen. Let's go through it. So basically the pathology arises from the worms feeding on and migrating through our tissues. So you're not going to be feeling too good when you're someone else's feast, okay? And then also through the accumulation and abundance of these worms, and then by becoming, I guess, infected from these worm byproducts, okay? How do you diagnose some of these? You can do a blood cell count, which is we refer to as eosinophilia. You can do serological tests. You can also just by noticing the eggs and larvae, or even adult worms in fecal samples, in the sputum, in urine, blood, or even in tissues after doing a biopsy. Okay. How do you treat these? You can actually take, so instead of taking, antifungal or antibacterial drugs, no, you'd take anti-helminth drugs, anti-worms, right? And so these will suppress basically the metabolic processes within these different worms, because they are different from human processes. And so it'll inhibit this worm's movement and basically kind of keep it from staying hooked on to the person. And basically it'll be a drug that affects the intestine, okay, or will concentrate in the intestine, okay. And these are the different drugs that you can use, and it explains the different kind of effects that they have on the worm and when you'd use them. So nematodes are the most abundant of the animal groups, and so most are free living within the soil and freshwater, but we can have 200 species that are parasitic, and of those 250 affect humans directly. And so the nematodes, right, they're roundworms, right? So they're elongated and cylindrical. And so if you go into the hierarchical scheme of these guys are kind of considered ecdysozoans because they have a cuticle that they shed every once in a while. And so uh, it always bothers one of my old professors. He said, cuticle is not, an exoskeleton. Why are they putting them in the ecdysozoans? But that's how they're classified. And they have an outer cuticle. They also have circular muscles. And they have a complete digestive tract. Okay, so they've got a mouth, an intestine, and an anus. Okay, and they also exhibit separate sexes. And so, human parasites, we divide them into uh, two different categories, which would be those that occur in the intestine and those that occur in the tissues. And so, intestinal nematodes will develop to some degree within the intestine. So we have Ascaris lumbricoides, and then we've got Strongyloides, and then we've also got hookworms. Tissue nematodes, these will basically where they have um, their larval phase and adult phase occurring in different soft tissues of the body outside of the intestine. So we've got the filarial worms as an example. Okay, and so here are some of them that occur in the different cycles. So, or that have a different cycle. So, with our intestinal nematodes, they can exhibit cycle A or cycle B. And so, Ascaris lumbricoides, and then Trichuris trichuria, and Enterobus vermicularis. These exhibit the cycle A. And then with hookworms, they've got that cycle B. Okay. Then we've got Strongyloides stercoralis, and then Trichinella spiralis. Okay. Tissue nematodes, right? We've got Wuchereria bancrofti, or Bancroftian filariasis is what you could call it. And we've got Onchocerca volvulus, right, which causes river blindness. And then we've got Dracanculus medinensis, and so this causes dracontiasis. Okay, and just as a heads up, right? The CH in Latin and Greek names, which is where all of these scientific names come from, we don't pronounce it with a ch. We don't say Wuchereria. We don't say Onchocerca. No, we say Wuchereria, Onchocerca, right? It's Jesus Christ, not Jesus Christ. So get used to kind of speaking in that scientific lingo, okay? So Ascaris lumbricoides, right? It causes ascariasis, right? Ascariasis, and so it's a large intestinal roundworm. When they are in the U.S., they occur in southeastern states typically. And so these guys are indigenous to humans. And they'll spend their entire stages basically within humans, right? So we've got their larval and adult stages. The only times when they're not is when they release their eggs in the feces, and you spread them to other humans through food or drink. And those food or drink can get contaminated, or objects can get contaminated. You get it on your hands, you lick your fingers, like, oh no, it's inside, right? And so once those ingested eggs hatch into the larvae, they will burrow through the intestine and then get into circulation of the body, eventually traveling to lungs and pharynx, and then they can just be swallowed again. So, the adult worm's complete cycle is in the intestines. So when they reproduce, they are selected, right? Meaning they produce rapidly and a lot, right? So they've got 200,000 eggs per day. My goodness. Busy bees, I guess. So the worms, they retain their motility. They're not attaching to a particular place. They're able to move around. And so you can get severe inflammatory reactions because of them moving around your body. And so those can kind of hint at the migratory route that they have. You can also get allergic reactions to these guys. Um, Heavy worm loads can also slow physical and mental development of a person. So this is what they look like. We've seen them in lab. And then here are their eggs, right? That's what we're seeing. Moving on. Let's get to Trichuris trichuria, okay? And this is what causes whipworm infection. So Trichuris trichuria is a whipworm. Humans are its only host. Wow, lucky us. Trichuriasis, it's usually, it has its highest incidence within tropical regions, okay? And so basically, the eggs, they hatch in the intestine. The larvae will then attach, um, and then, right, they'll penetrate to the outer wall and develop into adults. Poor fellows with this. Females, once again, they are selected, meaning they reproduce really quick, is what we say. But they have a lot of offspring. And so females will lay typically anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 eggs per day. Busy bees. And so these worms can actually pierce your capillaries and they can cause localized hemorrhages. Naughty little dudes. Um, and then heavy infestations can then cause dysentery. They can even cause rectal prolapse. And in children, who aren't as developed to fight off these kinds of infections, can die from this. Okay. Speaking of children, let's talk about pinworms, right? We've got Enterobius vermicularis, right? This causes a pinworm infection, right? Common name is pinworm. And so enterobiasis is most common with children, okay, especially in temperate zones. And so basically, right, eggs are picked up from the surroundings and swallowed. Once they're swallowed, they'll hatch in the small intestine and eventually develop into adults. And on their way out, they cause a lot of anal itching. And so uh, it's really bad. And the females will eventually emerge from from the intestine to basically release eggs. So you can actually sometimes see these little pinworms sticking out of the anus when they're trying to come out and get these eggs. And so you're getting a lot of this itching down there. And so self-inoculation is common. You can keep re-ingesting this pinworm, and a tape test is done to see if a child has this, or adult, Poor mothers of the children who ingest this. But yeah, little kids are gross. They're not washing their hands. They're touching their nether regions, and then they're going around and touching everybody and everything else. And so you may not even know it. And this little kid puts their grimy little butt hands on your sandwich. You eat a pinworm, and now you've got an itchy butt too. So really gross. But those are those guys. So on to hookworms, right? Um, these guys are called that because they look like a little hook. They've got curved ends and hooked mouths. Okay. Um, Necator americanus and Ankylostoma duodenale are what we're going to be looking at. And so how this happens is that we have humans shedding eggs and feces, right? So we're pooing them out, and they basically, right, they have their live form in the environment, and so or their filaria form, right? And so their larvae will then, when they get into contact with a human, right, or uh, or even they can occur in dogs sometimes, but with humans is where their life cycle goes through, right? It has to go through a human. But it'll burrow into the skin of your bare feet. So I'm sure a lot of y'all had your mothers yell at you, put on some chanclas, or put on some shoes, because don't be walking outside barefoot. Well, it's because they're worried about you getting hookworms. Okay, this is what they look like. Females got to be nice, big, and chunky so they can carry eggs. Um, and males are typically smaller. They've got the little hooks on them. Not to be confused with uh, the Ascaris worms. Okay, I know they have the little curly tails to be inside the females, but hookworms are different, because if you look at them under the microscope, they actually have like literal hooks from where they attach and burrow. Okay, and so the larvae will travel from the blood to the lungs, and they'll proceed up those bronchi and into the throat, and they're just re-swallowed again, guys. But worms mature, and so they'll reproduce in that small intestine, and they complete the cycle. Okay. They can cause pneumonia, they can cause nausea, vomiting, cramps, and even bloody stool, particularly diarrhea. And so, if the blood loss is significant, you can become anemic from these hookworms. Okay, moving on. We gotta keep trucking, guys. We're almost there. So we got Strongyloides stercoralis, right? And this causes strongyloidiasis. Okay, this is a threadworm, right? Common name, threadworm. So these are small little round worms, real small, right? You thought the pinworms were small; these guys are small. So they basically complete their life cycle in humans or in moist soil. So once again, we have them entering by penetrating the skin. This guy will then migrate to your lungs, and once again going back to be swallowed again, and where they'll then develop in the intestine. And you can just continuously reinfect the same host without ever leaving the body. But when it does, it can enter through the soils. Heavy worm load. This can cause pneumonitis, or eosinophilia, right? It can cause bloody diarrhea, and it can cause your liver to enlarge. Then you've got this obstruction of bowel movements. They're in your intestines there. So you're feeling a little bit bloated and a little constipated there, and it's painful. And you can also get malabsorption. You're not absorbing anything properly, and so yeah, you're becoming malnutrient. And so, moving on, further, we get into Trichinella spiralis, right? Or spiralis, right? This causes trichinellosis. And so basically, this life cycle is completely mammalian, okay? And so here we have it, and basically, right? The larvae will get into the muscle of a livestock animal. Typically, we have our pigs, right? And so once they've formed cysts, right, in that muscle, they can remain there for years unnoticed. But you can take a biopsy of the skeletal muscle, and you can actually see this in cross sections. These are fun to look at under the microscope. They're nice rolled up. You can see them around that muscle tissue and fiber. And so you can see that in the livestock or in yourself as well. And so the adults, they reproduce, right, and they form more larvae, and so they can burrow through the intestine, and then that's how they enter circulation. So when they're ingested, right, the cyst will then hatch and then mature in the intestinal lining. Okay. And this is just describing that. How do you get these? Eating undercooked pork or bear meat. Okay, I didn't know bear meat, but undercooked pork is usually how you get it. And so basically these larvae, they migrate from your intestines into the bloodstream. They're getting in your muscle, your heart, your brain, and that's where they're going to form these cysts. And initially, you'll get flu-like symptoms and diarrhea, and you think, oh, I just maybe ate some bad food, maybe I'm having like a stomach bug. But then you get these secondary symptoms which cause muscle and joint pain and shortness of breath. Okay, and then we get pronounced eosinophilia, right? And so you're like, oh no, I have COVID. Haha, just JK. No, it's a trichinella spiralis, right? Um, but once they have encysted into the host, there's no cure. Pretty bad stuff. Okay. So let's move on. We've got some tissue nematodes, okay? And so, basically these guys, they complete their life cycle, through the human blood or lymphatic system or through the skin, okay? They're just gonna be in these different tissues, right? And so filarial worms, they typically look elongate. They have filamentous bodies, and they're spread by biting arthropods, okay? And so, you can get what we call filariasis, right? And so this is actually a chronic disease that can deform the body in some way, right? And so what we're going to look at are these species that are most representative of filariasis, and we've got Wuchereria bancrofti. This causes elephantitis or elephantiasis. We've got Onchocerca volvulus, and this causes river blindness. Then we have Loa loa, which it's the eye worm. So let's go into this a little further. Wuchereria bancrofti, or Bancroftian filariasis, is a tropical infection, and it's spread through mosquitoes. Okay, and so basically, this mosquito will deposit the larvae of this protozoan into the human. And once it's there, it'll move into your lymphatic system where it'll develop to an adult. And when it's causing this infection, right, it's in your lymphatic system, right? So it's when it's there, it's actually blocking circulation. And so that's how you get elephantiasis. You get this massive swelling in different extremities. And so I'm sure we've all seen on like TV where we have these people with very large legs that we call elephantitis, and it's caused by Wuchereria bancrofti. That's typically what you'd see because they're in the lymph node and they're blocking that circulation, right? Lymph node causes, when you do have infected lymph nodes, you're gonna get swelling of the body, okay? And so, heads up, here we go. A photo of a person with elephantiasis or elephantitis, okay? And they have the swelling of those of their legs, right? Their extremities, because their lymph node is impaired, right? Their lymphatic system is impaired. And you can even just see they're in a tropical region. You're gonna be getting that. And you can also see poor guy's also smoking, so come on, guy. Choose your battles, okay? Deal with elephantitis, not lung issues as well. But oh well. Onto Onchocerca volvulus, right? This causes river blindness. How is this transmitted? Through the vector of the black fly, particularly the biting black fly, right? And so basically these larvae, once they're in the human, right, they develop into the adult form in your subcutaneous tissue layers, okay? And so adult females, they migrate from the blood up into the eyes. And so these will cause inflammatory reactions of your body trying to prevent this worm from going there. Your body's trying to do its best it can, so it's causing an inflammatory response. However, that's no good because when it does that, you get blindness of the eye, like you can't see because all this inflammation's going on. And sometimes um you know that usually happens when you have a double whammy of Wolbachia, uh, which is a bacteria. Okay, and so when you get Wolbachia, um, and this uh, Onchocerca volvulus, right? When you get those two together, that's when you experience river blindness. How do you treat this? You get tetracycline and ivermectin. Okay. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of ivermectin in the news due to COVID, but initially, what it is used for is for treatment of worms. Okay, guys? Worms. So let's go into Lola, right? This is the African eyeworm, and this is spread by the bite of these small flies. Okay, really wish it would tell you the exact species because that's fun to know. But basically, this is a very temperature-sensitive worm. So where it's going to occur is under the skin. Okay, it's not going to be going deep into our body systems where we're like 98.6, 98.9 as a temperature of humans. So it's going to stay under the skin, um, and usually under the eye. Okay, or once it enters the eye, that's what we see, right? And so we've got a treatment for this, and so you can get the worm pulled out. Um, or you can take diethyl carbamazine. Okay. I don't know if any of y'all remember Monsters Inside Me, but that was a fun show I used to like a lot. But I believe one of the episodes, a woman didn't realize she had this worm in her, and it wasn't until she saw it, you know, going around her eye that she decided to go to the doctor. Those were always so extreme. Go to the doctor as soon as you're having weird symptoms, guys. Okay. But I mean, can't blame her. Yeah, American health care system. Okay. Moving on, blood flukes. Let's talk about schistosomes, okay? And so these follow that fourth cycle, right? And I'm not making y'all memorize this cycle, but if you ever go on to take further classes like Parasit or other medical classes, you might want to know these, so they're just fun to know. But let's talk about the schistosomes, okay? And so these cause schistosomiasis, and it's a very very prominent disease. It's really prominent. And so we've got Schistosoma mansoni, Schistosoma japonicum, right, and Schistosoma hematobium. Sorry guys, I haven't said these names in a very long time, but we're getting through it. And so the adult flukes, they typically live in humans, right? And basically we're releasing their eggs into the water. And so early larvae, these will develop into in a freshwater snail, right? And it enters as a miracidium, and eventually when it enters that second instar, or second larval phase, it becomes a cercaria. Okay. These are words I don't need y'all to memorize, but that's the terminology for it. And so basically, right, this larvae will then penetrate human skin. It enters through the skin, okay? It'll mature into the liver for liver flukes. And so the adults will then migrate to places like your intestine or your bladder, and that's where they just completely shed their eggs. And then you get this horrible symptom of chronic organ enlargement, where your organs are becoming inflamed, and so they're getting larger. And so this is the phase, right? The miracidium phase, which infects the snail. This is typically what you'd see. They almost look like little snails without shells themselves. Um, And then this is the cercaria phase. And that's when it's released by the sail, and that's what enters through the skin. Please wear shoes, guys. Please wear shoes. Um, and so this is just an up close view of a schistosoma, particularly the genus Mansoni. I'm not having y'all memorize each um, individual species of the schistosomes. I just want you to know what are schistosomes, okay? And so these have a long, slender female, cradled within a groove, right, of a larger, thicker male. So this is like the opposite of Ascaris, like I had told y'all. Instead, the female is the little one, okay? So let's go on to flukes that are just of the liver because we were looking at blood flukes. Let's get into liver flukes, okay? And so, these are worms, right? Uh, they come of zoonotic origin, right? You're getting this from another animal, and you're not gonna say zoonotic. No, you need three O's for that. So zoonotic, okay? You don't say zoology. You say zoology. There's only two O's, not three, okay? So and then once again, epistler kiss, right? Kiss, kiss, kiss. Jesus Christ, not Jesus Christ. And so this, I learned it as Clonorchus. But epistlerchus, is I guess the new species name for it, or genus name for it. But I grew up, not grew up. I learned Clonorchus sinensis. Um, but once again, I'm not letting y'all memorize specific species. That's more of a that's a parasitology or an invertebrate zoology class, okay? But cycles occur between mammals, snails, and fish, okay? Humans, we get infected by eating cooked fish that's kind of raw, and this is where you have people get that kind of stigma of not wanting to eat sushi. But I mean, if you're getting uh, sushi from clean places, it's okay. You know where the fish came from. HEB sushi, I love you. Okay. But yeah, inadequately cooked fish, right? They'll contain this cercariae, right? And so what happens is the larvae will crawl into your bile duct of your stomach. Imagine, right, being able to survive bile, highly acidic, like what? That's where they mature, and eventually they'll shed their eggs into feces. Um, and then we infect the snails. Look at us, we're jerks. Um, but it continues that cycle because then the snail gets eaten by the fish, and then we eat the fish. It just keeps going, right? Um, then we have Fasciola hepatica. Okay, and so these cycles occur between different herbivores, snails, and aquatic plants. Okay, humans, how do we get infected by this guy? Why do we gotta know him? Because if you're eating raw aquatic plants, this fluke can lodge in the liver. Okay, and so these are what liver flukes tend to look like. They're a little flatter, and uh, dorsoventrally compressed, right? Just flat. So then we have flukes of the lung. Okay, so we've got Paragonimus, right? Paragonimus, Westermanni. Okay, and so these cycles can occur between carnivorous animals, right? So through the carnivores, snails, and then crustaceans. Not the crustaceans. And so humans, we get infected by eating undercooked crustaceans. This is something I don't have to worry about. I have a shellfish allergy, so I guess that's the one benefit of that. Ooh, I miss eating shrimp, guys. Sad days. Okay, but if you can eat shrimp or lobster or crabs, right? You can get infected if it's not cooked well done, enough to kill this guy, okay? And so then you get these worms, right? That are typically proliferate in the intestines, right? They'll migrate to your lungs. Okay, and then we have that thing of where they get swallowed again. But moving on. Okay, and that was for a lung fluke. I just want you to know flukes. I'm and especially the schistosomes. I'm not gonna have y'all memorize every single kind of fluke there is. Okay, I just want you to know that they're out there. Okay, and what they are. On to our cestodes, which are our tapeworms, right? So cestode comes from cestoda, which is the class, right? But in lab, we learned that the phylum, right, for our flatworms are Platyhelminthes. Platy meaning flat, helminthe meaning worm. Okay. So we've got our flatworms. So these are very long animals, thin, and they have ribbon-like bodies because they are dorsoventrally compressed, right? They're fancy phrase for just saying they're flat, right? And they're composed of what they call little sacs, but we know those as proglottids, right? And they've got a scolex, and so this will grip to the intestine. Okay, but each proglottid itself is its own little unit. What a unit, okay? They're adapted to basically absorb food and making and releasing eggs. And as we had seen in lab, guys, they don't have basic simple digestion like the nematodes, right? um they only have the sex parts, right? That's all they've got. And on top of that, they're hermaphroditic, right? So they can uh they contain both sex. They've got the testes and the ovaries within a single proglottid, so they can self-fertilize. And so they cause teniasis, right? And so these come from Taenia saginata and Taenia solium. Okay? I just want you to know Taenia, the genus, okay? I'm not going to make you know the specific species, okay? So you just need to know that the genus Taenia causes teniasis, right? And that these are cestodes or tapeworms, right? With very reduced organs, right? Like I had said, they've come to their evolutionary end. They're not really going to be evolving too much. They've evolved to have us do all the work, right? And so you can get these guys in beef. These guys are going to be huge. They can have up to 2,000 different proglottids. And humans are the definitive host, right? The host in which they reproduce in. Okay? That's what definitive host means. They're reproducing in that host. And so Taenia solium, this is what their particular species looks like under this beautiful micrograph. And so we have the suckers here, and then we have 2 rows of their hooks, or hooklets. And so we go into Taenia saginata. Okay, and so for this one, right, animals are infected by grazing on contaminated food from human feces. I know a lot of people are into like using their own manure for fertilization, but let's not, okay? Because then when an infection occurs, right, from eating raw beef, where the larval form is, right? It's encysted, right? Um, the human will ingest it, and we get the larva attaching into the small intestine, eventually becoming into an adult form. And so this one causes a few symptoms. You get this kind of odd abdominal pain you're not really sure about, and you're constantly kind of nauseous. But how you know it's there, you see the proglottids in your stool. And so this is just a general diagram. This is for the beef one of saginata. Okay. So let's talk about the pork tapeworm. Basically, guys, I just want y'all to know that right? We ingest them, right? Um, and that's when the problem happens. But for us, for the pork tapeworm, right? We get infected by ingesting their encysted larvae, right? So, and I'm not gonna have y'all know these words, okay? I don't know why I barely decided to describe what this word is, even though we had been talking about it previously. But as you can tell, I don't really like these PowerPoints, but I like the ones I make. This one is just I wanted y'all to have it then and there, okay? But we're you ingest the larvae when they're encysted in muscle tissue, right? So you're eating it from a little piggy, right? You're getting some pork chops. You're eating this, right? And then, right, the eggs will hatch in the intestine, and they'll release this tapeworm larvae, and they'll eventually migrate to all tissues and insist them into that tissue. Um, However, it's incredibly damaging once they get into the heart, the eye, or the brain. Once you get this pork tapeworm and it's gotten to that point, it can cause seizures and psychiatric disturbances. Okay, so like here is a picture of some meat that has these cysts. You can almost see the little worm in there. Uh, we've got it all completely um, yeah, they've formed these little cysts in there. Okay. Um, with this, I just kind of we've been talking about this as we've gone through all of these. And so we're just gonna talk a little bit about the vectors. I just want y'all to know, um, what arthropods can cause infectious diseases, right? Because they're vectors, right? Um, they are a vector, so they can cause a pathogen to enter the body. Okay, and so what are arthropods? Basically, they've got an exoskeleton made of chitin, right? And they're jointed, they're segmented, right? So they've got movable appendages. And so with arthropods, we've got arachnids, crustaceans, and insects. Okay. Um, Many feed on, so the vectors themselves, right? They've got to feed on blood and tissue, um, and basically, right? Uh, um, they're ectoparasites, right? They're parasites on the outside of the body. Okay. So think of a tick, think of a flea. Those are ectoparasites. When we'd dissect animals for our museum, we'd say, does this have any ectos, right? Does it have any fleas? Does it have any ticks? Okay. For medical importance, of these uh, of these different vectors, right? We call them biological vectors, right? Because they're medically important because they're transmitting these different types of pathogens, right, or infectious microbes through their process of feeding on us. Okay. And so, what are some common ones? We've got the mosquitoes, right? We have the Anopheles species. So Anopheles is strictly to malaria. Okay, know that Anopheles is to malaria. We can get filariasis from the common mosquito Culex and Anopheles, which is the South American one, and that one can transmit nematodes. Okay, and so this is worldwide throughout the tropics, right? Okay, and then as we had spoken before, we have the tsetse fly, the sand fly, the black fly, and tsetse fly, sleeping sickness, right? Sand fly, leishmaniasis, black fly, um, onchocerciasis. Okay, and we have our biting bugs. This is uh, in the species Triatoma, in the family Reduvidae. Okay, so triatomas cause Chagas disease. Okay, or they they are a vector for Chagas disease. Okay, and so basically mosquitoes. you get these anywhere you've got water, right? It's been raining these past couple of days. I jokingly told someone that, hey, I need to, instead of putting on like a body spray or body mist, I need to be um, dousing myself in off spray before I come to campus because these mosquitoes are wild. Um, but okay, so they'll appear in more tropical regions because they need that water, right? And female mosquitoes are the only ones to draw blood, right? Male mosquitoes don't. They just they don't even have mouth parts. They're just there to breed and die. Okay. Um, they've got life figured out, I guess. But females, right? They're gonna be needing to eat because they want to produce eggs, right, and reproduce. So they're gonna once they take that blood meal from us, they transmit that disease, which we get as malaria, filariasis, and dengue fever. Okay, which we didn't talk about. Um, and then we have fleas. These guys, one jump can be a whole football field across, right? So they're highly motile. They're also flattened, right? Um, and so very small. They can get around. And they feed on warm-blooded animals. Like you can get bit by a flea from uh, someone's dog or their cows and stuff. So they're around. But because of that, they carry or they can cause zoonotic diseases, right? And zoonotic diseases is just a disease caused um, by animals. Okay. And so, fleas, they were carriers of plague, of murine typhus, right? Which we didn't talk about, but these are just some different vectors, right? And so we've also got lice. Ew, lice. Okay. They're small, very soft-bodied, right? And so they attach to head and body hair for feeding. And so basically, they're very inconspicuous, and they're feeding on blood and tissue fluid. Okay. Um, and so what happens with lice is that they can release feces which contaminate wounds, and with that you can get epidemic typhus and relapsing fever from them injecting their host with these different um, uh, pathogens. Okay, and so in case you didn't know what a mosquito looks like, here's one feeding on a human. It's a female, right? Um, Here we have a flea, and you can see it's already had a good meal. It's nice and it's got some blood in it. This is a louse, okay, and so these a louse is just a single form of lice. Lice is plural, louse is singular. And so ticks. Let's talk about ticks, right? So these can be clinging on vegetation, and they attach to the host on contact. And so we have them in the form of larvae, nymphs, and adults. But the adults they're going to be getting their blood meal by piercing the skin of their host. Okay.